The deal is cut for the residents of Flint in what could be the biggest settlement in Michigan history. Attorney General Dana Nessel is here to talk about that and her lawsuit against the U.S. Postal Service. And the Democrats have made their case for Joe Biden. Tomorrow night, the Republicans opening arguments to keep Donald Trump in office. Today is Sunday, August 23rd, 2020, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. I'm glad you're with us as we are right in the middle of the political swale, these few days between the political conventions. And by conventions, I only mean that in the sense of convening rather than the customary gatherings. Well, how did you think the Democrats did with the new virtual realities? While Joe Biden's speech seemed to get really high marks, the ratings would suggest for overall the week really was just not the same to viewers. So what do the Republicans do now with the same circumstances, having had perhaps a little advantage of watching what worked and what didn't over the last week? We've got a group of Republicans raring to go this morning with their takes on what it's going to take to keep the White House in the red. But up first, this week it was announced that a deal had been reached on a settlement that runs to $600 million for those ravaged by the Flint water crisis. That is an eye-popping number, and yet, is it enough? We're going to talk about that with our State Attorney General, Dana Nessel. We're also going to ask her where the criminal case stands for Flint. And we're going to talk about her suit against the United States Postal Service as allegations continue to swirl that the mail system is being kneecapped to intentionally impact the ability of voters to cast their ballots by mail. All today on Flashpoint. All right, off the top today, it's been a busy week for Michigan's Attorney General, first joining some others attorneys general in taking action against the U.S. Postal Service and the Postmaster General. And then we found out that this massive settlement had been reached in this very long-running odyssey of the Flint water crisis. Very happy to have with us the Attorney General of the state of Michigan, Dana Nessel. Good to have you back on the program. Thanks so much. It's been, as I mentioned, a very crazy week for you. We'll get to the Postmaster in a moment, but let's start with Flint, if we could. $600 million sounds like a massive amount of money, and yet people have started to do the math, and they wonder, even though it's probably going to go down as the biggest settlement that Michigan has ever been involved in, is it enough? Does it match up with the damage that's been done to so many people and so many families?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Devin. Firstly, let me say that when you combine all the other things that have been done in Flint and all the other programming, it's really roughly more like $1 billion. But this will be $600 million new dollars that are entering into the settlement for the plaintiffs. And it goes for all kinds of different things. I mean, we're talking about nutritional programs, child health services programs, early childhood programs and lead prevention and abatement, school aid, programs for seniors, and of course the replacement of all the lead lines in the city. And the list really goes on and on. Will it ever be enough to fully make people whole and to totally compensate people? Of course not. But I will tell you that the governor and I have done the best that we possibly can under the circumstances. And we hope that this does at least a little bit to bring some justice to people for whom it was long overdue. This is probably not your part of the purview on this, but because Michigan self-insures, there's really not a pool of money where this is necessarily supposed to come from. Where's the money going to come from? Bonding, primarily bonding. Simple as that. Yeah. We did the very best we could to make sure that the state would remain solvent. Now, when we started these discussions, of course, we had no idea what was in store for us in 2020, and that we would have all these issues with COVID-19 and the way that that would impact the state budget and the economy as a whole. But we do think that this is a way that we can finally put this settlement onto paper and without costing the taxpayers too much of a burden in the way that we're doing it. And we try to structure it over many years. And certainly if we went to court and if there were a trial or probably, many trials, and the state was hit with a big judgment, we wouldn't be able to structure it that way. And so we think this is best for the taxpayers of the state and certainly what's best for the residents of the city of Flint.
Everybody's taken pains to point out that 80% of the money is going to children, basically, under the age of 18. When you start to do the math, I don't want to sound like a naive waif, because I understand how the world works. But when about a third of the money is most likely going to be eaten up in attorney's fees, is there anything to be said about that, or is that just the way the world works?
Well, we wanted to make sure, of course, that the money primarily went to the young children that were impacted, because, of course, we know that drinking water that has lead in it is most likely to impact people who are still in the midst of their growth cycle, and that especially applies to infants and toddlers.
Yeah.
So we thought that the money should mostly be directed towards them, because they're the ones who suffered the most harm. And then again, all of these various different programs that we tried to put into place that could assist these children as they grow and as they try to learn, and as their medical needs perhaps increase. So, you know, we did as much as we possibly could with the resources that we had. But again, will it ever be enough? I don't think it will be.
Do you expect a third of the money to go to attorney's fees?
I don't know that the number will be a third. And my understanding is that that point is still negotiated. Obviously, Judge Levy will ultimately have to make those decisions. She's the one who has to approve the settlement. And there's a special master involved, and that's something that will be coordinated between the parties. But yeah, a chunk of this is absolutely going to go towards attorney's fees. That's the way any plaintiff's case that involves contingency fees work.
Yep. I know that you have, of course, famously separated yourself from the criminal case, but what kind of update can you give us on the progress there? You basically had your office stop the case that had been proceeding and start over from scratch. Do we have any sense of where we are on that proceeding and whether or not Governor Snyder is implicated?
So, as you know, my Solicitor General, Fadwa Hammoud, and Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy were assigned to handle the criminal cases. And again, as you indicated, we do have a conflict wall in place, and I was negotiating on the civil side. They're handling the criminal cases. And what we know is that they went to great lengths to ensure that they had all of the documents and all of the devices that were involved in this investigation, some 20 million documents that were recovered. Initially, when they walked into that investigation, when I took office, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of only 800,000. So that was a lot of work to do. While I'm not permitted to know, I can't ethically know exactly what they're doing, I will say that knowing what the schedule is of Solicitor General Hammoud, I know that she's working all day, every day, around the clock on the Flint investigation. So exactly what her timetable is, I can't tell you, but all I can say is certainly the criminal investigation is not done, and that I do expect to see prosecutions emanate from that investigation. Exactly who's going to be prosecuted, exactly what charges will be filed, that I can't say, but I know that they are working feverishly to move forward as quickly as possible.
Attorney General, let's move, if we could, now to the action that you've joined against the U.S. Postal Service. The Postmaster General has, in a reaction almost to the uproar that he heard from people like you and the other attorneys general across the country, stopped a lot of the machinations that were put into motion to try to change procedures and take machines out of the post office. None of that has dissuaded you from going forward with your suit. Why wasn't that enough to get the action stopped? Wasn't that the point in the beginning?
Well, he said he stopped, but obviously we don't know that for certain. And as I think Ronald Reagan famously said, trust but verify. And so what we need to do, obviously, and what we think is very important, is that we have a court order that is entered, and it can either be stipulated to by the Postmaster General or just ordered by the court to say that no further changes can be made. But more so than that, we want to see these pieces of machinery that were responsible for sorting hundreds of thousands of pieces of mail each and every day restored and put back into operation if that is possible, because we know that it's not just a matter of our everyday mail, the prescriptions that we receive through the mail, when we pay our utility bills, even when we send our grandparents a Christmas card or a birthday card. We want those things to occur in a timely manner. But beyond that, as Secretary Benson has indicated, she's expecting in the neighborhood of 3 to even 4.5 million absentee ballots to be sent through the mail in the November election. And we need to know that these can be processed in a timely manner and that they will be counted on election day. Because as you know, Devin, in order to be counted, those ballots have to be received by the local clerk by 8 p.m. on election night.
The Postmaster General, though, and the President, we'll have to wrap it up with this part of the question, both, especially the President famously, keeps talking about this being a failing business operation, that we've got to do something to get these billions of dollars in cost wrapped up. Do they not have an argument that they simply can't afford to provide the service that perhaps we've all become accustomed to?
They absolutely don't have an argument. First of all, I don't see how you make this a more efficient process by ripping out necessary machinery that processes so much of our mail. Secondly, I don't understand, this is not a business. This is our government. These are services that are provided to us via our tax dollars. No one ever asks, is the military turning a profit for us? We don't do that in all other sectors of government. This is a service that has been provided to Americans for over 200 years. And for the president to suddenly say, at the same time that he indicates that he doesn't want people to be able to vote via the mail, even though that's how he himself and his family votes, for all of these changes suddenly to take place and to take place illegally is incredibly suspect. And we need it to stop as quickly as possible so we can make sure that in November, everyone gets an opportunity who is eligible to vote and that every vote counts.
Only got about a dozen other things here that I'd love to get to, but we're going to have to leave it there. We will have you back, I hope, again very soon. Dana Nessel, thanks so much for the time, for being on Flashpoint today.
Thanks for having me. We'll
bring in a group of Republicans to discuss the RNC National Convention, which starts this week. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
The sun and high heat can fry your car's paint job. But Maaco can make it look like it never happened. Act now with our paint sales starting at $4.99. Uh-oh, better get Maaco.
Apartments.com makes getting into a new home easier than ever.
How hot do you think it is?
1 million. So hot the bugs can't even sleep.
If only we had AC.
I'm so happy.
Apartments.com, the most popular place to find a place.
Devices are like doorways that could allow hackers into your home. And like all doors, they're safer when locked. That's why you need Xfinity XFi. With the XFi gateway, devices connected to your home's Wi-Fi are protected, which helps keep people outside from accessing your passwords, credit cards, and cameras, and people inside from accidentally visiting sites that aren't secure. And if someone tries, we'll let you know. XFi Advanced Security. If it's connected, it's protected. Get Xfinity Internet and ask how to upgrade your in-home Wi-Fi. Switch today.
The sun and high heat can fry your car's paint job. But Maaco can make it look like it never happened. Act now with our paint sales starting at $4.99. Uh-oh, better get Maaco.
All right, welcome back. The Democrats had the first shot at the new surreality of the political convention. Tomorrow it begins for the Republicans. So let's talk about it with a group from the Grand Old Party. Very good to have with us, as you see there in the lower left-hand of the quadrant, Tori Sachs from Michigan Rising Action. Above her, Sandy Barua, the head of the Detroit Regional Chamber. To his right, Dennis Cowan, back with us, the former mayor of Royal Oak, and very good to have with us the congressman from Michigan's 7th District, Republican Tim Walberg. And Congressman, I'd like to start with you, if I could. We'll get to the convention in a minute, but coming off of my conversation with Dana Nessel, I'm curious about your thoughts on what we've been watching at the Postal Service. We saw the Postmaster General undergoing a pretty good grilling on Friday in front of a Senate committee, and he'll move to a House committee tomorrow. What are your thoughts about what we've been watching take shape in the Post Office?
Well, first and foremost, and it's great to be with you. First and foremost, this is just another in a long string of efforts to discredit the work of our president and the administration. They couldn't get it on Russia, couldn't get it on Mueller, couldn't get it on Ukraine, couldn't get it on impeachment. COVID, they've had a hard time defining that was produced by Donald Trump, and the type of effort he put toward it with science and with medical professionals, the top in the land. doing what we're doing. We're learning as we go, but nonetheless, it was a great job. So now we're trying to discredit, I believe, the victory of Donald Trump in the end by trying to portray that he had done something to help hurt the Postal Service. Stop and think about it. The Postmaster General was not appointed by President Trump. It was appointed by the board that had responsibility for it. Congress in the CARES Act added $10 billion of a money. $1 billion cash on hand that'll take them into 2021. The post office right now is dealing with the amount of mail that they dealt with in 1977. There are efficiencies that are needed. There are efficiencies that we can put in place. But this Postmaster General has made it very clear we're doing no more efficiency production until after the election. So we can do it. The Postal Service will be there. But I'm encouraging people to go to the polls. And if you're doing absentee ballot, then go to the clerk's office, get the absentee ballot, fill it out, turn it in right there, and you know it's taken place. We saw what took place in the last election primary in Detroit. That's a challenge that we see about trying to push people to not do what I think we can safely do, and that's go to the polls and vote for your candidate. Mark it as an opportunity. You don't have to stick your thumb in a bowl of purple dye or purple ink, but you are a privileged citizen. Get it done, and it will work well. And let's see what happens in November.
Let's move ahead, if we could, then to the convention and what needs to be done there. Tori, after what you watched this past week, it is an unusual and weird situation to try to do all this without the usual crowds. And I would suggest that I suppose that the teleprompter is a better friend to Joe Biden than it is to Donald Trump, who really does thrive on being able to speak off the cuff and being able to feed off a reaction from the crowd. How does he now duplicate that this coming week?
I mean, I think President Trump has a lot of good things he can talk about. He can talk about better trade deals like the USMCA that's really helping Michigan right now, Michigan's business. We needed that years ago, and now with where the economy's at, we really are going to need it. So I think he has great things to talk about, lowering taxes, the defeat of ISIS, being tough on China. Joe Biden may have given a decent speech from a teleprompter, but he won't talk to media. He won't, go and talk to people in general, and he's not going to have a teleprompter for the debates. So I think you'll see Donald Trump and the Republican Party really highlighting what they've done the last 4 years and laying out a vision for what the next 4 years and really getting our economy back to where it was at the beginning of this year, and knowing that they can do that.
There are those who've suggested, Dennis, that really the art here is going to be moving this onto anything other than the pandemic. The response to the pandemic by almost any measure hasn't been very good. We lead the world in the poor response, I guess, to it, given the deaths and the cases. So how do you now keep that from being the elephant in the room?
Well, first, on the pandemic, that's a shared responsibility, not only of the federal government, but of all the state governments. So we can save that discussion for another day. In watching the Democrat convention, first, I was struck that being the party of Hollywood, they couldn't even put on a good show that was entertaining for 2 hours to keep the ratings up. Secondly, Biden talked so much about darkness and light, I thought it was going to be dialogue from Star Wars movie that I saw recently. So I think Trump's got a lot more. It'll be a much more optimistic convention and discussion about the future of America, about what he's done for working families, the tax cuts, the additional money for unemployment compensation, and the $3,400 check that he has said is going to be sending to families. So I think it's going to be a much more optimistic. I thought it was a very down convention for the Democrats, and quite frankly, they needed the traditional convention with all the hoopla, because they have an enthusiasm problem for the Biden-Kamala Harris ticket.
But Dennis, isn't that the way it worked in reverse the last time around? It was the Republicans who were so despondent over the current administration that's what they ran against.
Well, I'm not sure what they're running against, although we do know that they mentioned Trump more in their convention speeches than they did Joe Biden.
Well, of course, because
any gap is going to be because nobody wants to talk about policy. Nobody wants to talk about fighting China. Nobody wants to talk about Iran being kept in check. And that's because Joe and President Obama gave Iran $6 billion to spend in terrorism around the world. So I think it's going to be easy to combat type of things that the Democrats are going to put forward in this Republican convention.
Let me bring Sandy in. I would suggest, though, Dennis, that most second-term presidential elections are a referendum on the current administration, so you do end up talking about them more than you do yourself, I suppose. But Sandy, you have been rather famously one of the Republicans that the Democrats featured this past week. You have not really enjoyed these 3.5 years, and the reason I wanted to include you is whether or not there's anything that the Republican Party can do to bring you back into the fold this week. What do you want to hear?
Yeah, there's a small group of us. We meet in a phone booth of loyal, longtime Republicans who have some real questions about how this particular administration has handled their responsibilities. You know, I think, listen, if I were advising, the Republicans in the Trump campaign, and I think they're doing this, they need to do two things primarily. Number one, they need to rebuild trust with suburban educated voters. These are the voters that went to the polls 3.5 years ago, had real questions about the Clintons and Hillary Clinton, and decided to take a flyer on Donald Trump. And he's lost a lot of those people. Now, not all of them, but he's lost a lot of them that might make a difference in states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and others. And the other thing that they need to do, and this is what, frankly, Donald Trump and the Trump campaign is really, really great at, is bringing out the fear, bringing out the kind of the negative side, as Dennis was referring to, and that will have the effect of suppressing the vote on the other side. And that, frankly, is a tried and true campaign tactic. Both sides have used that over the years. I just don't think we've seen any campaign use it to the art form and elevate it to the art form to the Trump campaign.
Congressman Wahlberg, what do you do with that perception that there seems to exist, at least in the popular imagination, that Republicans want fewer people to vote, to suppress the more people stay home, the better it is for Republicans?
That's not us. In fact, that's why we're encouraging people to get out and vote. We're talking about the greatness of America in our convention. We're talking about something far different. And Sandy, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but the people you represent have experienced untold benefit from this administration's policy. If you want to wrap yourself around personality, wait till you see Kamala Harris. If you want to wrap yourself around policy, we have an economy up till March that will continue to grow even now because of the principles we put in place. Deregulation of unnecessary regulations, reduction of taxes that didn't simply go to the wealthy. It went to the bottom line to employ people. Michigan benefited from that in manufacturing. You know, what we heard in the convention this week from Democrats was their mantra, which ends up being defund police and other things, dismantle our civil society, destroy our economy with policies that we've seen destroy the country. Whereas the Republicans, we're talking about renewing the American dream, restoring the way of life, rebuilding the greatest economy ever. And if that doesn't get through to the educated, and I guess I don't represent a bunch of educated people because I have a lot of rural people in my district, but they're awful smart. And they're going to go for the same things, I think, in the end, that the suburban so-called educated people are going to ultimately say, I can get past personality, when we've now seen the evidence that it's only this administration that brings us forward.
Tori, I've only got like about 20 seconds left. Are you worried? I know we've learned from the last time around, don't put too much faith in the polls, but are you worried right now that the president is lagging so far?
No, I've seen polls as close as 3 and 4% this week for both President Trump and John James going into the final 2 or 3 months of this race. Michigan's in play, and people are smart enough to talk about educated voters. Voters are educated enough to know that Joe Biden's been in politics for 47 years. If he was going to do something substantial, he would have done it by now. Donald Trump created the best economy we've had and he'll do it again. And I think that's what people are going to focus on.
Well, you've helped make the case for the GOP. We'll watch them do the rest as we head into this next week. Gang, thank you all very much for being with me today.
Thank you.
Stay safe. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more Flashpoint right after this.
The biggest Labor Day sale ever starts now at Gardner White. Sunday, shop and save up to $1,000 off the largest selection of top name brand mattresses in Detroit. Plus free same-day delivery, free TVs, free box springs, free bikes. And we say yes to credit with 0% financing up to 72 months. Serta any size, $76. The biggest Labor Day sale ever starts now at Gardner White, Detroit's new #1 mattress store. Sunday, 11 to 8.
There are more than 1,000 reasons to check out Wayne County Community College District online. New online classes and programs, online student services, financial aid and advising, and a bookstore that delivers to your doorstep. It's a new day and a new way at WCCCD. Register for summer and fall now.
Will I outlive my money?
Medicaid is so confusing.
A will, or do I need a trust?
What if mom needs to go in a nursing home?
At Samasco Law, we have the answers to all of these questions. Our attorneys will eliminate the confusion and develop a plan that's right for you. We are dedicated to veterans benefits, assisted living, and nursing home care. Samasco Law can help prepare you for a long future. Call Samasco Law today.
Last summer, the Detroit Out Loud Festival brought the city together for a day of music, food, and fun. And while we can't be together in person, we can still show our city some love. Detroit Out Loud is back for a special virtual event featuring dance performances, cooking lessons, special appearances, music performances. Don't miss out on the fun. This is your chance to represent your city. Show how much the D means to you. Find out more at DetroitOutLoud.com. Presented by the Quicken Loans Community Fund and Local 4.
Didn't have near enough time to get to it all, but isn't that the story of Flashpoint? Thanks so much for being here. Obviously, this week we will have the RNC covered. NBC's coverage will get started every night at 10 p.m. and we'll stream it for you on Click on Detroit. Meet the Press is next. Have a great week. See you next time on Flashpoint.